there's that. And then there was the whole like, I think because I study sociology, and it was one of those things of no matter what we study, or no matter, I try and tailor my studies around Black community and Black people, but the only representation that we get in the UK is from American studies, and it's African Americans don't represent what UK Black people are going through, because the difference with UK Black people in America is that they have been there for centuries. They have been there for longer than what we have been here for. Yes, there are some first generation migrants, but for their culture and our culture is two different things, because like myself, there's more first generation migrants, and there's a difference in how the culture works, because we are the first ones to create this new migrant culture and this new culture that comes from, that we're probably going to pass on to our kids in the second generation, and it can't be a representation. But yeah, so there was that, and just the struggle that I've kind of gone through with school, and just my own personal experiences that I've been through. And it's one of those things, because I lived in England before I lived in Scotland, and it was a shock of coming to Scotland, and that being the first point of my racial awareness, and being like, oh, so I'm here, but I'm also not normal. And I'm also, is pointed out very regularly that I'm not normal. And it's very much obvious. And it's when I look back, and everyone has that first experience of like when you first realize something as a child. And it was one of those things, I first realized what racism was when I moved to Scotland. And it kind of happened there on. But yeah, so that kind of led me to that point. And I think also with becoming a mother, it's been a fact of, I don't want to have the racial conversation with my child that my parents had to have with me. I don't want to have to go home, like have my child to come home and ask questions that I was asking my parents, and them having to be like, well, you need to realize that you're a Black person, because that shouldn't be something that hinders my success, or it shouldn't be something that hinders how the teachers are going to treat me, or how other people are going to treat me, or just how life is going to be as a Black person, because it should be the same. That, like, for you guys, I don't think you guys have had to have that conversation with your children, or your parents haven't had to have that conversation with you guys. And it's one of those things that, as part of my upbringing, is normal teenagers go as like puberty and whatever. You also get you're Black, so you might get stopped and searched, you might get beaten up in the street, you might get raped. Like, there's so many things of how Black people are treated, and it's like our parents have to then pass on that conversation, but also what we're not being educated in school. And then like say for instance, like with the whole history and stuff, so when we learn slave history in school, we'll go home and ask our parents, and our parents are like, well, actually that didn't happen, or there's other things that they've kind of missed out, and things like that. And it's because I kind of felt like in my school we kind of got given the Roots DVD, and we all watched Roots, and that was it, that was a conversation done, and that was the topic done. You just basically had an essay to write on film. So yes, I think I didn't want to have those conversations with my son that my parents had to have with me, and I don't want his generation of kids to have to go through the same thing. And it got there. So yeah, so what we have done, obviously with George Floyd, kind of sparked a big uprising in the whole world. Like, it has changed the world, and it sparked conversations that, yes, they've been happening before, but because everyone is in lockdown, given the whole pandemic and stuff, it's more obvious, and it's more in people's faces, and the news was going on. But the one thing that I personally felt that the UK had done was, in the midst of the UK finding out that BAME people are that more likely to die because of the pandemic and things like that, and we were very much going through the whole Boris Johnson's doing investigations and things like that, and then George Floyd died, and it's kind of like, even though you're dying because of a virus, this is what is going on over the sea, and the UK hid behind that. And I don't know how, if anyone else feels the same, but it was kind of like one of those things of, we were going to get to a point to find out why our lives are in danger here, being key workers and things like that, but they just wanted to say like, oh, it's just not as bad. And that falls in line with the whole, a couple of years ago when Boris Johnson had mentioned that the UK is the least racist, so that should be a good thing. And it came about with, like, there's been quite a lot of musical people down south that have been commenting like, just because you're the least racist doesn't mean that you're not racist, and it doesn't mean that what we're saying isn't happening. And I've had a lot of conversations with people in Scotland that are just like, well, it's not a thing here, and Scotland very much wants to deny that it happens and that it's going on. And even with the whole, like, people being like, but why are you fighting for George Floyd? And it's like, we're not fighting for George Floyd in Scotland, we're fighting for Sheikh Abayo, because that happened on our soil, that happened with our Police Scotland, that happened on our land, and it was a black man. And because the media didn't want to portray it, or no, like the governing bodies didn't want people to find out the extent of what actually happened to his death, people forgot about it. And even since this year has happened, I've had people come up, like approach me and talk about Sheku Bayo, and they've only just found out. And this is the first time they've heard about it or spoke about it. And I'm like, it's been 5 years. How can you be so oblivious to something that's happening in your country? So the whole reason for June 7th protest, that came about of, we need to highlight what's going on in Scotland. We need to speak our voices, because even I spend a lot of time between here and England, and the one thing that a lot of people get shocked by when I'm down south is there's black people in Scotland, and they don't know that we're here, and people here don't know that we're here. So where are we? Where are we going to be seen? Where are we going to be heard? Where are we going to be recognized for what we're doing, and just trying to live our lives and things? So that was one of the biggest things. But also with the original team that had organized the protest, it had been commissioned through it was a group of white people that like organized it, and no one disregards or discredits what they did. It's very nice that they set it up and had the initiative to do it. But our biggest thing was, how can there be something that is for our rights that isn't being represented by us? How can people that aren't going to benefit for the changes that are happening with the government, how can the people that aren't going to see or feel the active changement that happens in Scottish society be the ones to make the change? Because just like Matt Hancock said, that diversity of thought, that can't translate into actual lives. So you might feel for someone, you might have compassion and have sympathize with what they're going through, but until you've actually had that yourself, you can never tell anybody this is what's going to make it better. Or you can never try and give someone different scenarios of, this is what I think should be done for that community, or this is what I think we need in this community. And also, you're not seeing it from the inner circle, and you're not seeing the problems that we're facing from the inner side. So that was the biggest thing that we kind of took the protest from them. And but it wasn't a sense of case we took it. It was more so we had approached them and asked for them, and they passed it on because they realized themselves as well. But yeah, so we organized that, and since then we've had protests all throughout Scotland. We've been speaking with councils, speaking with government, and we're trying to make active and positive changes for the community. And we are now in process of registering under a new body that is going to represent the African Caribbean community in Scotland. And we're hopefully going to work alongside the guys that are doing Black Lives Matter, and alongside the government and the council, and just be a safety net for people in the community and try and go from that way. But hold on, I'm just checking my notes. Sorry. Yeah, so what we wanted to do is, the biggest thing with the whole, from the protest and the rest of it, is that the need for an anti-racism campaign should really come from within. And even BAME is a sticky, even with the word BAME, it's sticky because some people don't mind being fallen under that category. Me personally, I don't like it. I don't use BAME for myself. But the reason I don't, and a lot of people don't like it, is because Black and Asian minorities, yes, we're a minority, but our experiences are two different things. And what the Asian community goes through and what the Asian community has done is different to what we go through as Black people. And it's just kind of like, by the government doing it, it feels like they just want to group it. And if they group it together, it means that they can maybe sort one part of it and leave the other ones aside. Because even when you look at how the Asian community has come up through generations, and even to the fact that within Scotland, there's an Asian tartan, and now there's a Singh tartan, and not many people even know that themselves. Like, there's a tartan that falls under the name Singh. So how has that community got to that point to have that much recognition? Because if you grown up in Scotland, Scottish people are very proud, and they have pride in their country and pride in their freedom and being Scottish, and there's the whole Scotland England divide. So it was one of those things, if the people being that prideful, how did they donate that to someone of colour and bring them in on it? And how come there's not a black tartan? Oh, there's so many different cultures within the Black community, but how come we haven't got to that point of recognition? How come our efforts within Scottish society haven't been seen yet? So I think personally for some of us in the group, it's got to a point where we want to be represented as Black minority ethnics, not BAME, not BIPOC, or not people of color. We are Black, and what we're going to do is for the Black community. And it comes from the point that our needs are much more complex because they are forgotten about, and they are, no one really wants to listen to it. And also within our community, it comes from a place of being so scared and so worried and so oppressed that we feel like when we have spoke about it in the past, it's just been ignored and nothing's been dealt with. So what's the point in speaking up? Because I've noticed the generational like gap between my parents' generation and my generation of we're more open and we're more like that's not okay, and we'll question things and do whatever. Whereas my parents came on survival and they came on a fact of let us not bother them because we need to keep this job, or let us not bother people in the community because I need to keep my house. And it shouldn't be the same for people. It shouldn't. It just, yeah, I think things need to start changing. Um, and I also think that it comes to a point with there's not any black politicians in Scotland, and there's not any black people in high statuses like that. And I think that's one thing that you can't have an anti-racism thing, or you can't bring about of any racial change or justice within societies until you have someone that is actually there that can speak for them and that can actually represent the people. And that's a big important thing. And because imagine if it was flipped, and how would you feel if you were in a place where you weren't the normal people, the culture wasn't normal to you, you had to learn everything new, society didn't represent you, and laws were against you? And like what Stephen said earlier, in a sense of the percentages of stop and search, I have myself been stopped and searched various times and for no reason. And it's happened when I've been in a group of white people and I'm the only black person there, and the police will move them out the way, but go for me. And then like even when the white people have questioned them, it's just like no, she fits a description. And it's like, but what was the part of the description that that person fits? And they will say it. They'll say black. They won't say anything else. Like, even if I'm wearing something different, but the police will outrightly say like, we just got told a black female or black whatever, or even just the fact that they want to just search you because you're a black person and make you feel ostracized. And there's that scary part of power that this is why it's getting to the point that the police globally have been getting away with what they want because they put their bias towards their job. And it goes back to like the KKK times. So back when the KKK was up and running in America, a lot of the people that were actually within the KKK were the police officers, the judges, the nurses, the doctors, the lawyers. Like these people that are making these big impacts in society and big decisions in society essentially do have some form of bias in them. And it's hard to make changes when they don't want to do anything for you or for your community or for anything, and then society just follows suit. So yeah, hopefully we'll try, and I hope I'm getting that point across. Yeah. Hopefully we'll try and get some changes for everyone. But yeah, so I wanted to talk on, aside from that, I know the guys want me to talk on like the Scottish movement and like just what's going on in Scottish racism and stuff like that. And I think it's a weird thing. The more I've spoke about it with people that I know that live in Scotland, the more that we've pinned down that Scottish racism is unique and it's its own kind. It's never, the one way I can pinpoint it is it's at a point where it's so covert and it's so hidden and it's done in little tiny things, but it's so covert that it just becomes in your face overt, and it becomes so forward and so like, oh wow, this is really happening. And there's been times where I've actually had to take a step back whilst I'm going for an experience, and it'll be something so little as like, in a sense of, I had a job interview for RBS a couple of years ago, and the guys obviously looked at my name on paper, seen that I'm a student, and just thought that I'm exchange student, or say that I was like here studying. And as soon as I walked in the interview and introduced myself, he was like, "Oh, you've not got an accent." And I was like, "What?" And he was like, "You've not got an accent. Like I thought you would have an accent." I was like, "But from where?" And he was like, "Well, wherever you're from." And I was like, "I came from Leith. Like, I don't know what you expected." And he was like, no, but like wherever you're from, you don't have an accent like that. And he was like, you speak really good English. And the more we were getting into the conversation, I was like, I'm here for a job. Like, before you've asked me anything else, I'm here to make money and to have an income. So why is this being the first thing that you're shocked at? One, I actually live here, and two, I'm foreign exchange student, and three, I don't have a foreign accent like you expected. And then throughout the whole interview, it got to a point where he would ask me the questions, but he would revert back to the fact that my race is a topic of conversation, and everything to do with my race in a sense of my hair, my culture, my country. Like, there was so many other things. And obviously I'm from Rwanda, which a lot of people that know about the country know about the genocide. So that took a lot of the conversation. And he was talking about, and I was like, if I get the job, we can talk about these things. But until I'm at that job, what's the point in doing whatever? Because you're not actually finding out about me. And it got to a point where I got that uncomfortable, I just left. And that was one small thing. So imagine that being everyday life for people in Scotland, and everywhere they go, there's little tiny microaggressions and little tiny things that are done to them. And yeah, I think Scottish racism is very unique, and even just the little things of, in a sense of, there's kids in my area that will call Chinese, when they go to get a Chinese restaurant or whatever, they'll call it a racial slur, and that's so normalized. And that was one of the biggest things that shocked me, and just the use of very, very obvious racial terms and racial slurs. And I remember like just being called kunta kinte in school all the time, and little things of like when you would be walking through. So it within my school there was, I think there must have been like 5 or 6 black people in the school, and we were obviously minority. We stayed together as a community and we spoke to each other because that's where we were comfortable. But what we noticed was that if we were saying we were sitting together in the canteen and stuff like that, people would sit around us and make monkey noises, and just little things like that. But then because it's like, oh, we're just making a noise, when you go and tell the teacher that, the teacher's like, but what does a monkey have to do with black people? And they don't even know what to do. And the teachers, they're like, because they feel like, oh, well, if we get them in trouble, those are the rowdy boys, so they're going to make our life harder as a teacher. But I'm like, but then that makes my life harder as a pupil. And even when I speak to my younger siblings and like cousins and stuff, they're still going for the same thing. And I'm like, you can't have that. It creates that mask that when you grow up and everyone is an adult, it'll be fine. And then you get into adult life where you have the exact same treatment in the workplace. But instead of them making monkey noises, they're asking, is that your real hair or not? Or how long is your actual hair? Or do you live in mud huts back home? Have you been back to your country? Is it safe for you to go home? Like things, little things like that, that I don't think people realize that you can bring them into conversation, but you need to know how to bring them into conversation and how to do it correctly and how to do it without offense behind it. Because I don't mind, and many people are saying, we don't mind you asking about our culture and finding out and educating yourself, but there's a line between stereotyping and just thinking that's the answer for everyone, and actual, I want to know more about you as a person, and I want to know more about things like that. So yeah, so that has Scottish experiences, it's been a lot. And I think even now with everything that's going on, what I've noticed that it's kind of turned from people just, there is people that are still very blatant and will say it in your face and whatever, but now I've kind of noticed that people are very apprehensive to talk to the black community, and they feel like they are feared of saying the wrong thing, and like they won't know how people are going to take them. And even that is a level of ostracization that I'm like, that just makes it worse, because then you're essentially avoiding them completely, and they will be left as like the left aside, and they won't be included and won't integrate in society. Because that's the biggest thing that people complain, is that immigrants will come here, stay within the communities, they won't integrate and do everything, but it's like you're not making it a safe space for integration. You're not making it, all you're doing is creating a hostile environment. So yeah, it's a catch-22, because I don't mind people being cautious and being aware of certain words and certain terms that might be viewed as offensive now, but know where the line is between I'm being cautious and I'm just not going to speak to you because you're a black person. I don't want to get in any bother or any trouble from it. So yeah, Scotland experience is a bit tough, and it's one of those things that even within my own circle, like I've got a mixed race son, so he has his white family, has his black family on this side, and sometimes I've noticed with his older generation, when like he's still got his great grandparents and stuff, and I've noticed that there'll be certain little things that they'll say, and it's like it'll be a joke, but I'm like, I just don't want him to hear that. And it's like, how do you tell an elderly person? And it's got to the point where I've said to his dad, can you have the conversation, because it's your grandparents, it's not up to me and whatever. But then he's like, yeah, but they're old. And I'm like, but that's the conversations you need to have with old people. In the same way that you would tell your granddad you can't call a gay person the F word or things like that, you can't say certain slurs around LGBT, you would tell your dad you can't say this around black people. So it's more of a point that it's your own son they're saying it to, that you should be more willing to. But yeah, it's a bit of a complicated one.